The atmosphere on the planet Virex-9 was electric. Thousands of alien species from across the galaxy had gathered to witness the most anticipated event in the Galactic Alliance's history, the intergalactic military demonstration. Earth's representatives, the humans, were finally getting their chance to prove themselves to the greater universe. The stage was set for a battle of military might. The aliens, from the towering Wylon to the slick Vork, were all in attendance, each species with its own unique abilities and technologies. It was a rare occasion when so many powerful civilizations could gather in one place. Earth had been given a spot on this grand stage, a platform where they could showcase their military advancements. But Earth's forces were young, and to the other species, they were nothing more than an experiment. After all, humanity had only recently begun to take its first steps into the stars, and compared to the ancient empires of the galaxy, they were mere children in the cosmic theater. Among the alien dignitaries was General Threx, the commander of the Kroval Dominion, a race known for their ruthless precision and vast military power. His sharp, angular features and cold eyes radiated arrogance. The moment he stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. The lights dimmed and his voice echoed across the arena. "I come to witness the humans' great military," he said, his words laced with mockery. "Let's see if the great Earth forces can do anything more than throw rocks at us." The crowd erupted into laughter. General Threx's reputation was well known. The Kroval Dominion had conquered countless planets, and their military prowess was legendary. The human military, on the other hand, was still a fledgling force, barely able to hold their ground against established empires. To Threx, the demonstration was nothing more than a formality. Earth was not a threat. But Earth had something to prove, and they would show it in their own way. The human delegation, led by Colonel Mira Havel, stood silently at the edge of the stage. Mira, a woman of quiet strength and sharp intellect, was the embodiment of Earth's willpower. She had endured many battles, but this one was different. This was not just a military exercise. It was a test of humanity's place in the galaxy. Yet, there was no anger in her eyes, no desire for revenge. She stood still, like a stone at the bottom of a vast ocean, her calm demeanor betraying nothing. General Threx continued his taunts. "Do you humans even understand what true power is? You think you can compete with the mighty Kroval? Your weapons are crude, your tactics laughable." He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping over the gathered audience. "It is almost cute how Earth believes it can challenge us." As Threx mocked them, Mira didn't flinch. She had been trained for moments like these, where words could hurt more than any weapon. Her silence was not submission, it was strategy. She knew the game he was playing, and she was prepared to play it differently. While the crowd roared with laughter, Mira's mind was already working, her soldiers already in position. The Earth forces had come to this demonstration with one purpose: to surprise the galaxy. The Grand Hall was filled with holographic displays of Earth's military forces, their tanks, their ships, their planes, all appearing outdated compared to the technologically advanced weapons of the Kroval Dominion. Threx pointed to the displays and chuckled. "This is what you bring to the table. These relics? Pathetic! The galaxy has moved far beyond such primitive machines." Mira, still standing at the back of the stage, watched him carefully. She understood the importance of this moment. This was not just a military exercise, it was a lesson. The universe had underestimated Earth before, and now they would learn the hard way. Without a word, she motioned to her team and the operation began. Across the galaxy, on the barren moon designated for the demonstration, the groundwork had already been laid. Earth's forces had spent weeks preparing for this moment hidden beneath the surface, in tunnels deep below the moon's desolate exterior. The world above remained calm, but underground, Earth's military engineers were hard at work, setting up traps, seismic devices, and cloaked drones. The humans had not come to simply demonstrate their strength. They had come to show their true potential. Back in the arena, Threx had grown bolder, continuing his verbal assault. "Your kind can't even handle the basics of warfare. I faced the most advanced species in the galaxy, and none of them were as weak as you. You should have stayed on your little planet, hiding from the bigger forces." He smirked, his voice dripping with disdain. The laughter from the crowd seemed endless. Even the Vork, a race known for their wisdom, couldn't suppress their amusement. To them, Earth was a curiosity, a species that had yet to prove itself capable of anything significant. They believed this mock exercise would be over in moments, with Threx emerging victorious. But what they didn't understand was that Earth's strength lay not in their weapons or their technology, but in their resilience and ingenuity. Suddenly, the ground beneath the stage began to tremble. At first, it was a small shake, a mere vibration that was barely noticeable. But then, the tremor intensified. It wasn't an earthquake. Earth's soldiers had triggered a series of seismic charges placed deep within the moon's crust. The rumbling grew louder, more intense, as if the planet itself was shaking in response to the mockery it had endured. The audience fell silent, confusion spreading like wildfire. What was happening? On the barren moon, the surface cracked open, and massive explosions lit up the sky. The seismic devices, placed with pinpoint accuracy, triggered shockwaves that sent shock and fear into the Kroval troops stationed there. They scrambled, unable to comprehend what was happening. Their superior technology, their advanced weaponry, it was useless against an attack they hadn't seen coming. It was not just the ground that trembled, it was the foundation of their confidence. Back in the arena, General Threx's smug expression faltered. He turned to his advisors, confusion clouding his sharp features. "What is this? What is happening?" he demanded, his voice now filled with unease. But no one had an answer. The ground continued to shake, and Earth's forces, cloaked in adaptive camouflage, began to move. They were invisible to the naked eye, but they were there, silent, efficient, and deadly. The Krovans, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves caught in a fight they couldn't win. As the battle raged on, Threx realized with growing horror that the humans had done the unthinkable. They had turned the entire demonstration into a trap, and now they were in control. The audience, once filled with laughter, was now on edge. The smugness that had characterized the first moments of the event had vanished, replaced by a creeping sense of fear. The humans had shown them something they hadn't expected. Not brute force, not advanced technology, but a level of cunning and strategy that was far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. And as the ground trembled, Threx understood this was not a battle to be won by weapons alone. Earth had come to play a different game. The arena fell into an uneasy silence. The sudden tremor that had rocked the ground, followed by the swift disappearance of Kroval forces, left the audience on edge. No one had expected such an immediate and devastating turn of events. The alien dignitaries, who had once laughed at Earth's military, now sat in stunned silence. General Threx, still reeling from the shock, stood rigid, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. His usual calm and calculated demeanor had evaporated. But instead of retreating in embarrassment, he did something unexpected, something that would forever change the course of the demonstration. Threx, with a deep breath, stepped forward. His voice, once filled with ridicule, was now sharp and challenging. "This is not how it was supposed to go," he began, his eyes scanning the audience and then locking onto the human representatives. "If Earth's forces are so clever, if they are so capable, let them face a true test. A real challenge." His words echoed through the hall. The other alien leaders, sensing the tension, leaned forward in their seats. They had no idea what Threx was planning, but they knew it would not be an ordinary challenge. His pride would not allow it. General Threx's gaze fell on Colonel Mira Havel, the leader of Earth's forces. She stood silently at the back of the stage, her expression unreadable. She had not flinched when he mocked her species. She had not reacted when his insults cut through the air like daggers. But now, with the entire galaxy watching, Threx saw an opportunity. He would put Earth to the test in a way they would never expect. If their forces were truly capable, then they would need to prove it under the harshest conditions imaginable. "I challenge you," Threx continued, his voice now a steady growl. "You think you have what it takes to compete with the Kroval Dominion? Let us see you prove it. A war game. A mock battle between Earth's finest and my elite unit on a remote moon in the Assyrian system. We will see if..." Your tactics can stand up to the might of the Kroval. I'll give you every advantage: terrain, time, and weapons. All I ask is that you show me you can survive." The room was tense as the alien leaders murmured among themselves. Some were excited at the prospect of a true test of Earth's abilities. Others were doubtful, still unsure whether the human forces had anything to offer. Mira, however, had already made up her mind. She had come here to prove Earth's worth, to show that humanity was not just a fledgling species, it was a force to be reckoned with. Mira stepped forward, her calm demeanor never wavering. She met Threx's gaze with a cool, unflinching stare. "We accept your challenge, General," she said simply. The words were small, but they carried weight. It was not a declaration of war, but a promise to the universe. Earth would not back down. They would not be cowed by mockery, no matter how deep. The challenge was set. The terms were simple: Earth's best soldiers against the Kroval's finest in a simulated war game on a barren moon. The location was remote, isolated from the prying eyes of the galaxy. There, the two forces would fight, not for glory, but for respect. And though it appeared to be a simple mock battle, Mira knew there was more at stake than just victory. The entire galaxy was watching, waiting to see if Earth had the mettle to rise above the stereotypes that had been imposed on them. To them, Earth's military was a joke. This challenge would prove whether it was truly a joke or a force capable of shaking the very foundations of the galaxy. For the next few days, preparations were made. The alien dignitaries and their entourages departed Virex 9, but the whispers of the upcoming battle followed them. General Threx, no longer mocking, began to gather his elite Kroval forces. These soldiers were known for their deadly precision and unparalleled strategy. They had never been defeated in battle, and Threx intended to keep it that way. He knew his men were superior in combat, and he relished the thought of crushing Earth's forces. It would be quick. It would be easy. Meanwhile, on Earth, the atmosphere was different. Mira Havel's team moved with purpose and discipline. They had trained for this moment, for the challenge that would be their first true test in the galactic theater. But Mira was not concerned with their training alone. She was focused on something deeper: strategy. Earth's military might not have the advanced technology of the Kroval, but they had something just as powerful: their adaptability, their ingenuity, and above all, their resilience. Earth's soldiers could take a beating and get back up, no matter how many times they were knocked down. They could face the impossible and find a way to win. As Mira's team prepared, the countdown to the battle began. The moment was drawing near. The remote moon, a lifeless sphere of dust and rock, was ready to be the stage for the most important battle humanity had ever fought. Both sides were preparing for the unknown. Threx's forces were confident, preparing for an easy victory, while Earth's soldiers readied themselves for a fight that could change everything. The moon's surface was barren, offering no natural cover or advantages. It was a blank slate, one that would test not only the strength of their weapons, but the strength of their minds. Threx, now focused entirely on the battle ahead, gave one final speech to his troops. "This will be over before it even begins. The humans are nothing more than a distraction. We will destroy them swiftly, and then the galaxy will know that the Kroval dominion is unmatched." His words were filled with arrogance, but there was an undercurrent of something else: uncertainty. Deep down, Threx knew that underestimating Earth had been a mistake. And as the final moments before the battle approached, that nagging doubt began to creep into his mind. On the other side, Mira addressed her team. "We're not here to win with brute force. We're here to win with our minds. We don't need to be stronger, faster, or better equipped. We just need to outsmart them. Trust in each other. Trust in our training. And trust in our mission." Her voice was steady, but beneath it was the weight of the responsibility she carried. The eyes of the galaxy would be watching. Earth's reputation, its future, was on the line. The challenge was set. The two forces stood at the precipice of what could be the most important battle in galactic history. And as the ships carrying the soldiers from both sides descended onto the barren moon's surface, the galaxy held its breath. What would happen next would change everything. The stage was set, but no one, Not even Threx knew how it would end. Only one thing was certain: the outcome would be a lesson that the galaxy would never forget. The moon's surface was eerily silent. A desolate wasteland of dust and craggy rocks stretched endlessly beneath the pale light of a distant sun. No wind stirred the lifeless air. No clouds obscured the sky. It was as though the very planet held its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. And in that silence, the two forces, Earth soldiers and the Kroval elite, prepared for a battle that would decide the fate of their reputations, if not more. On one side, Earth's forces stood ready. They were far from the powerful armies of the Kroval Dominion. Their armor wasn't as advanced, their technology less refined, but they carried something much more dangerous: resolve. Colonel Mira Havel paced slowly among her troops, her eyes scanning the horizon. They were ready, but she knew that this battle would not be won by brute strength alone. Their victory would depend on their ability to adapt, to outthink an enemy that had never been challenged on this scale before. The Kroval were confident, too confident, and that would be their downfall. Mira had studied them closely during the preparations: every move, every strategy, every flaw. The Kroval had been dominating the galaxy for centuries, but they had never faced humanity in a fight where the stakes were more than just survival. This time, it was about proving that Earth belonged in the galactic fold. The soldiers around her stood in disciplined silence. Their faces were a mix of determination and uncertainty. Some were young, eager to prove themselves on the battlefield. Others, like Sergeant Kyle Renner, were veterans of multiple campaigns, their eyes hardened by experience. Yet, despite their differences, they all shared a common bond: they understood the significance of this day. The galaxy was watching. Their families, their friends, their entire species, everyone was counting on them. There could be no failure. Mira paused as she came to a small hill, where the first drops of sunlight began to filter through the atmosphere. She turned, facing her soldiers with a resolute expression. "Remember why we're here," she said, her voice steady but carrying a weight of authority. "This isn't just about defeating an enemy. This is about showing the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated. The Kroval think we're nothing more than children with weapons. Let's prove them wrong." As the words left her mouth, a soft rumble vibrated through the ground. It was faint at first, like the deep growl of some distant thunder. The soldiers tensed, their instincts alert. But it wasn't the sound of a storm approaching. No, it was something far worse. The ground beneath them was beginning to shake. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tremors spread across the moon's surface. It was a low, steady vibration, unnerving but not yet dangerous. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, gripping their weapons a little tighter. Mira knew exactly what it meant. The Kroval were preparing. They didn't need to announce it, didn't need to prepare anything dramatic. They would strike quickly, decisively. And they would strike hard. Mira's comms crackled to life, the voice of Lieutenant Jace Navarro cutting through the static. "Colonel, we're detecting movement." "They're here." Mira nodded. She had known this was coming. The Kroval had no intention of wasting time. They would come at them fast, hard, and relentless. They would show no mercy, no hesitation. It was their way. The soldiers around her began to shift into formation, their movements sharp and precise. They had trained for this moment. They had learned how to move as one, how to think as one. There would be no second chances, no room for mistakes. "Stay calm," Mira said, her voice firm. "We've trained for this. Stick to the plan. We will survive this." The rumble grew louder now, vibrating through the ground like the thrum of a massive engine. It was not a single vehicle or a group of soldiers moving forward. No, this was something bigger, something that would challenge their every expectation. The earth shook beneath them, and Mira couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creep up her spine. The Kroval were known for their overwhelming firepower. They had weapons that could tear through metal like paper, machines that could devastate entire landscapes with a single strike. And yet, she remained calm. She had to. She was the leader, the one who would guide them through the storm. Meanwhile, on the other side of the moon, the Kroval were making their own preparations. General Threx stood at the forefront of his forces, watching as his elite soldiers moved into position. Their hulking frames were clad in sleek, black armor, their faces concealed behind visors that reflected the harsh light of the distant sun. They were a sight to behold, an army built for war, a machine designed to destroy. And Threx was its leader, its most powerful weapon. He had never been bested, and he wasn't about to let Earth's forces be the first to change that. Threx's thoughts were focused. His soldiers had been chosen for this mission because of their unparalleled strength, speed, and combat prowess. They had been trained to handle any threat, no matter how advanced or unexpected. And yet, as the tremors beneath his feet intensified, a small part of his mind nagged at him. This was different. The humans were not what he had expected. Their tactics were unpredictable, their resolve unshakable. They didn't fight like other species, and that made them dangerous. As forces began to move, Threx glanced over at his right-hand officer, a towering Kroval named Exaler. "Prepare the artillery," he ordered, his voice low and commanding. "We will crush them with overwhelming force." Exaler gave a sharp nod, signaling to the rear of the line where the massive war machine stood ready. The Kroval had a vast array of weapons at their disposal: cannons that could rip through armor, mines that could level entire battalions, and energy weapons capable of disintegrating any resistance. And yet, even with all their firepower, Threx couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The humans hadn't responded yet. They hadn't shown their hand. What were they waiting for? Back on Earth's side, Mira stood at the front of her lines, her eyes scanning the horizon. The tremors had stopped, but the silence was deafening. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the impending battle pressing down on everyone like a physical force. Her soldiers were ready. They had no choice. They had to be. The first volley of shots rang out. A massive explosion tore through the air, the shockwave sending a tremor through the ground. The battle had begun. And in that moment, the silence before the storm was shattered, replaced by the deafening roar of combat. The fate of both forces would now be decided on the blood-soaked surface of the moon. The galaxy watched, its breath held, waiting to see which side would emerge victorious. The galaxy had known many battles, but none like this. As the stars twinkled far above, distant and cold, the tremors from the moon's surface reverberated through space, carrying with them a sound, a hum, a vibration that even the most seasoned military commanders could feel deep in their bones. It was the sound of something extraordinary happening, something that no one had anticipated. The galaxy was about to witness a shift in power, an event that would send shockwaves across every corner of the known universe. On the moon, the tension between Earth's soldiers and the Kroval elite was thick enough to cut with a knife. The ground shook with each blast, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and scorched metal. The battle had begun with devastating force. Earth's soldiers, though smaller in number and less equipped, fought with a tenacity that the Kroval had never experienced. The Colimian war machines, massive, hulking figures that towered over the battlefield, fired relentless waves of plasma bursts, tearing apart the moon's landscape with each shot. And yet, despite the sheer force of their enemies' onslaught, Earth's forces stood firm, holding their ground with grit and determination. Colonel Mira Havel, leading from the front, had anticipated this. The first wave of attacks was just the beginning, an introduction to the real fight. Her eyes darted across the field, watching the movements of her troops and the enemy alike. The Kroval were known for their brutality and overwhelming force, but they had one weakness that Mira was determined to exploit: their arrogance. The Kroval had never faced an opponent quite like humanity, an enemy who fought with unpredictability, who could adapt and improvise on the fly. She smiled grimly as she watched the first Kroval unit attempt a flanking maneuver, only to be ambushed by a hidden squad of Earth soldiers. The tactic was working. Slowly, the Kroval's confidence was beginning to slip. But Mira knew the battle was far from over. The real threat hadn't revealed itself yet. The ground beneath her feet trembled once more this time, with a force so powerful it seemed to shake the very fabric of the universe. The tremor sent ripples through the battlefield, and even the Kroval, who had never shown fear before, paused for a split second. Their commanders looked to the sky, searching for signs of what might be causing the disturbance. Up above, In the far reaches of space, a massive Kroval flagship loomed, its enormous silhouette blocking out the distant stars. The ship had been in orbit since the beginning of the battle, observing the ground conflict below. It was from this behemoth that the Kroval's final weapon would be unleashed. General Threx stood in the heart of the command deck, his massive form bathed in the cold blue light of the control panels. His expression was unreadable as he watched the chaos unfold below him. He had never anticipated such resistance from the humans, but he had also never doubted his own superiority. "Prepare the orbital bombardment," he ordered, his voice low and filled with the calm assurance of one who had never known defeat. "The humans will learn the cost of defying us." The weapon was ready, an array of energy cannons capable of leveling entire continents, capable of erasing the very life from a planet's surface. Threx had no doubt that it would break the humans. The Kroval's superiority was undeniable. They would crush this rebellion, as they had crushed countless others before. And yet, as he turned to give the final command, something strange happened. The tremor increased in intensity, and the control panels in front of him flickered wildly. The lights dimmed, and a deep, vibrating hum filled the room. For the first time in his life, Threx felt an unsettling sensation of unease. Back on the moon, Mira had felt the tremor as well, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a simple shockwave from the battlefield, it was something more. The ground was shaking as though the very core of the moon had been disturbed. She turned to her communications officer, Lieutenant Jace Navarro, who was frantically tapping away at his console. "Colonel," Jace said, his voice tense, "we're picking up strange readings from the Kroval flagship. It looks like they're preparing something big." Mira's pulse quickened. She had expected the Kroval to retaliate with force, but this was different. What were they planning? She couldn't afford to wait around to find out. She needed to act fast. Her soldiers were ready, but this new development required a different kind of response. "Ready the countermeasures," she ordered, her voice cold and commanding. "All units, prepare for a shift in tactics. We can't let them get away with this." The ground beneath them continued to shake, and the sound of distant explosions reverberated across the battlefield. It was as though the entire planet was responding to the threat above. Mira felt a deep, unshakable instinct rise within her, a sense that something was coming, something that would change everything. Meanwhile, in space, the Kroval's flagship was powering up its weapons, and Threx stood at the helm, watching as the energy beams began to charge. The massive cannons hummed with an intensity that made the very air vibrate. With a final, calculated glance, Threx gave the command, "Fire." The beam made its way toward the moon, a deadly harbinger of destruction. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The galaxy watched in silence as the weapon began its descent, its target the very surface of the moon where Earth's forces stood ready for their final stand. But as the beam neared, something unexpected happened. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the moon's surface, creating a brilliant, blinding light that seemed to dwarf the Kroval's weapon. The energy wave rippled out, distorting the path of the beam, sending it off course. For a brief moment, the galaxy held its breath. What was this? What force had just deflected the Kroval's most powerful weapon? Mira stood with wide eyes as the light cascaded across the battlefield. It was not a weapon she had ever seen before, but it was powerful. The tremors continued, more intense than ever, as if the moon itself was coming alive. She had no idea what had just happened, but one thing was certain: Earth's forces had just received the help of something far greater than they had anticipated. In the chaos that followed, the Kroval flagship began to falter. Its systems glitched, and its weapons were momentarily disabled. The crew on board scrambled to regain control, but the damage was done. The tables had turned. The balance of power had shifted. The galaxy had just witnessed the first sign of humanity's true potential, something that had never been seen before. And in that moment, the tremble that had shaken the ground of the moon reverberated far beyond, echoing through the galaxy. The Kroval were no longer invincible. The war was just beginning. The war had dragged on for months. The Kroval forces, once sure of their dominance over the galaxy, were now beginning to falter. They had underestimated the humans. What had started as an invasion of Earth had turned into a fight for survival against an enemy they had never fully understood. They had called the humans weak, primitive, and unworthy of attention. Yet now, as their war machines crumbled under the pressure and their most elite commanders found themselves on the defensive, the Kroval began to realize the truth. Humanity was not what they had assumed. The battle on the planet Scaroth was the turning point. Once a distant and insignificant outpost in the galaxy, it had become the heart of the conflict. Scaroth was the site of the Kroval's latest attempt to crush the human forces. With their overwhelming numbers and superior technology, they had expected the battle to be over in a matter of hours. But as the hours stretched into days, the Kroval were forced to reckon with the humans' resilience. Colonel Aaliyah Matthews stood at the front of the human lines, her eyes scanning the battlefield. Her soldiers, though fewer in number, fought with a fierceness that had become characteristic of humanity in the face of impossible odds. They were not the best equipped, nor did they have the most advanced technology, but they had something the Kroval did not: determination. Aaliyah had been through countless battles, but this one felt different. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the air humming with the energy of an impending storm. The Kroval had launched wave after wave of attacks, sending their war machines and soldiers in relentless assaults, only to watch as their efforts were slowly but surely turned back. What had started as a confidence in their overwhelming power was now crumbling into frustration. The human soldiers, though bleeding and battered, had turned the battlefield into a proving ground of ingenuity and willpower. The Kroval, known for their brutal tactics, found themselves forced to adapt. It was something they were not accustomed to. The Kroval general, Torok, stood high above the battlefield, on the command deck of his flagship. His face was a mask of rage. This was not how he had imagined the campaign unfolding. The humans were supposed to break quickly. They were supposed to fold under the might of the Kroval Empire, but instead they had done the unthinkable. They had turned the tide. They had fought back. Why are we not crushing them? Torok barked at his officers, his voice cold and venomous. Why are our forces failing? One of his lieutenants, a younger officer named Zorik, hesitated before speaking. General, it seems the humans. They are adapting faster than expected. They are learning. They are not behaving like we anticipated. Torok's eyes narrowed. He had never been one to admit defeat, and the thought of losing to such a primitive species filled him with disgust. Yet, the evidence was undeniable. The humans had fought with a cunning and resilience that left even the Kroval forces struggling to keep up. For the first time, General Torok felt the sting of uncertainty. On the ground, Aaliyah's soldiers were preparing for the final push. The Kroval had concentrated their forces at the central command post, their strongest position on the planet. If they could take that, they would deal a crippling blow to the entire Kroval fleet. But Aaliyah knew that the Kroval would not make it easy. The final assault would be their most dangerous yet. Her team of soldiers, battered but unbroken, gathered around her, each one with the same look of determination in their eyes. We've taken down their war machines. We've fought off their best soldiers. Now, we take the heart of their operation. This ends today. The soldiers nodded, tightening their grips on their weapons, each knowing the risks but prepared to face them. Aaliyah knew the challenge ahead would be perilous, but there was no turning back now. They had come too far. Earth had come too far. As the soldiers made their way toward the Kroval stronghold, the ground beneath them trembled once more, this time with a deep, resonating force. The air seemed to thicken, as though the very planet was holding its breath. Aaliyah stopped in her tracks, looking up. The sky above the battlefield darkened, and for a moment, it felt as if the galaxy itself was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. General Torok, from his flagship, had finally made his decision. He would not let the humans get away with this. The Kroval forces would make their final stand. They would show the humans that their resistance had been futile. He would crush them and end this foolish rebellion once and for all. Activate the final weapon, Torok ordered, his voice cold as ice. The massive weapon, hidden beneath the surface of Scaroth, was a last-ditch effort. It had the power to obliterate entire cities, to lay waste to everything within its range. The Kroval believed it would be enough to finish the humans off. But as the weapon powered up, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath the battlefield shook with such intensity that even Torak felt it in the command deck. The weapon sputtered, its energy pulse faltering. The lights in the Kroval flagship flickered as if the very systems were failing. "What's happening?" Torak shouted, panic creeping into his voice for the first time in years. It's the humans," Zorik said, his voice trembling. "They've activated something. We can't stop it." Alia's soldiers, moving in perfect unison, advanced through the trembling earth. They had no way of knowing what was happening in space, but they could feel the shift in the air, the sudden surge of energy. It was as though they had unlocked something deep within the planet itself. Whatever it was, it gave them a new strength, a new resolve. Then, with a deafening roar, the ground erupted. A massive shockwave tore through the Kroval's position, sending debris and dust flying into the air. For a moment, everything was chaos, smoke, fire, and the sounds of crumbling technology. The humans had unlocked a force more powerful than anything they had ever imagined. In that moment, the Kroval realized their mistake. They had underestimated the strength of the human spirit. When the dust finally settled, General Torak stood before his commanders, his expression no longer one of anger, but of something deeper fear. The humans had not only survived, they had forced the Kroval to retreat. The general's voice, once filled with scorn and superiority, now trembled as he gave his orders. "Retreat," he said, barely above a whisper. "We are pulling back." The humans had won. And though Torak and his forces had suffered a humiliating defeat, one thing was clear: they now knew the truth. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The fear that had once been absent from their eyes was now unmistakable. As they retreated from Scarif, they carried with them the undeniable truth that they had just witnessed something incredible, something that would forever change the galaxy. In the aftermath of the battle, Alia Matthews stood tall amidst her soldiers. She looked around at the faces of her comrades, each one reflecting the same pride and respect. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. And as the news of their victory spread throughout the galaxy, there was one thing that the Kroval could not deny: the humans had earned their place among the stars. They had earned not just the respect, but the fear of the mightiest empire the galaxy had ever known.